So hello everybody, and welcome to my talk. Very glad to be here. My name's Chris Scarisbrick. I'm the National Sales Manager for Sectra Limited. For those of you that don't know us, Sectra Limited are a company that has been in the medical imaging IT space for some 35 years. And in that time frame, we've focused on little else. There has been no other distractions. It's what we do, and it's where we've spent much of the last 35 years focused. Yesterday, you could say that the primary focus was on radiology. Of course, it was. That's where most of the drivers for the digitisation of the enterprise came from. Today, we take a look at image management from a much broader perspective. There are many different image producing departments within the trusts now, and we believe that they should all be brought together into a single management platform, and it's a term that we refer to as integrated diagnostics. So I appreciate that in the crowd here today there may be quite a lot of IT people, so for that reason I'll spend just a few moments talking about what pathology is and a very brief introduction to digital pathology. So pathology is split into two main areas. Well, first of all, it's the study of disease, but it's split into two main areas: anatomical pathology and clinical pathology. Clinical pathology describes the diagnosis of disease based on analysis of body tissues using the tools of chemistry, microbiology, hematology, molecular pathology. Not really the space of medical imaging per se. Anatomical pathology, on the other hand, relies heavily on those diagnostic aspects performed by a microscope and a human being, ultimately the pathologist. And this really is where the suite of digital pathology solutions really come into their own and really add value to that care pathway. What you see here is a typical representation of a pathology slide. This is a section of an appendix magnified some 200 times. The purple dots that you see on the slide are cell nuclei. The lighter pink portions of the slide are the cytoplasm, and the red dots that you can see scattered around the slide there are actually red blood cells. For those that are keen of eye in the audience, you'll be able to see there's a green line on that slide, and it measures 0.4 millimeters. That really gives you a scale of the footprint of the data set that we're looking at here. This is, especially when you bear in mind that this is just one small part of one individual slide. Now, a particular study may take in up to 50 slides. So it'll come as no surprise to the IT guys in the room that each and every slide could weigh as heavy as half a gig or a gig per slide. So this is a significant change to the way that you guys do things. So where are we in terms of the adoption of digital pathology? Well, way back in the 1950s, the microscope was brought to the enterprise, and that pretty much remained for 40, 50 years. It wasn't until the 90s that compression algorithms and wide area networks and video formats had developed to such an extent that they could be coupled with the microscope for wider area reading of pathology slides. Fast forward 15 years or so, and scanner manufacturers had developed their products to such an extent that they could get the level of resolution required to provide that level of detail. Typically, these scanners produced formats in a proprietary standard, which meant that they needed to be coupled with their own viewers. This was great, served a purpose at the time, but didn't really look at the enterprise from a broader perspective, which is pretty much where we are today. Very much focused on the benefits that the integrated diagnostics piece can bring to the enterprise as a whole. And that's where we believe that companies such as Sectra and others really provide that value, and that's where that heritage and experience really comes into play. So, what will change? Quite a lot, but not so much as well. If you look to the left of the PowerPoint slide there, there's a whole heap of processes that will remain. You still need to acquire that section from the human body. It needs to be fixated, cut up, processed, embedded, sectioned, and then stained for visualization. That process will remain. If we follow the traditional workflow along the bottom of the slide, you'll see a huge amount of manual process involved at this point. A human being needs to check that those slides are appropriately acquired and embedded. Those cases then need to be sorted and assembled into packets. They are then literally put into a filing cabinet of sorts, where they are retrieved and taken to the pathologist for reporting and diagnosis at his or her microscope. Should that examination warrant further discussion, maybe at an MDT for oncology review, those glass slides are retrieved, taken to the MDT meeting, and hopefully presented alongside the radiology imaging, blood results, etc. If we follow the digital workflow, again you've got the glass slide preparation. However, this time the scanner will actually, the slides will be put through a scanner where they will be automatically and immediately passed over to an archive or digital storage facility. At the same time, they can be QA'd by somebody sat behind a workstation, be it somebody sat within an office, within the hospital, at home, or even further afield, perhaps in another country. And similarly with the digital diagnostics, the tools will be provided at a workstation. Again, no reliance for that glass slide to be moved around the enterprise. Again, if that slide requires some further follow-up, perhaps at MDT, then the pathologist can prepare that slide as part of a MDT work list, and they can be presented alongside the radiology images out of a single enterprise solution. So we've identified that quite a lot will change, so why do it at all? Well, as I've already said, traditional PACS vendors have their heritage out of radiology, where we contributed to the digitisation of the enterprise approximately 15 years ago. What we see today are exactly the same questions that were being asked by radiologists all that time ago. I warrant there are probably a number of radiologists in the audience, and I bet if I asked for you guys to put your hands up, probably none of you would go back to your film and light box combinations. This is the point that I get proved wrong, but let's hope not. Our experience tells us that pathology will go the same way, and it's really leveraging enterprise image management vendors' experience such as ourselves, which will ease that progression into a mature product for the enterprise. So into a bit more detail about why the world is digitising pathology and why you should consider digitising pathology. As we've already touched upon, there is a lack of pathologists within the profession right now. That makes it very, very difficult to balance workloads, to provide flexibility of service. Digitising the process really makes it able and much more efficient to move those images to the pathologist for reporting. The The digital tools that we now see and have seen for many years provide a huge amount of value to radiologists today. And again, we believe that pathology departments will embrace and take advantage of these tools that we can provide. You can do things with a digital review workstation that you could never do with a microscope, such as side-by-side comparisons of slides, such as the pathology alongside the breast imaging, for example, in a breast oncology case. Very important and provides a lot of added value. We've already talked about the inefficient internal workflows associated with moving these glass slides around. Back in the day, radiology films used to get left in orthopods cars or go home with a radiologist for reporting. Pathologists see the same issues today. So really digitizing this workflow means that lost images, misplaced studies are a thing of the past. Any pathologist will tell you that there is a huge amount of variation when providing diagnosis of pathology slides. And this really is a direct, or partly due to the fact that it is an analog process. Using the tools that we provide out of the digital platform, you get a much more standardized way of working. And again, I think that's something that radiology has benefited from over the years. Moving on to the efficiency of sharing point of view. Subspecialization is something that occurs naturally within pathology. There may be 2 or 3 lead pathologists on a specific pathology area. If you want an opinion from one of those pathologists today, then guess what? You've got to pack up those slides, put them in a jiffy bag, ship them at huge expense to that pathologist for that specialist review. Taking advantage of digital networks today, we can do that with the click of a button. And finally, and it is a point that I will come back to a number of times, we really need to be thinking about the integrated diagnostics piece. If your hospitals or your trusts or your organisations are having conversations about digital pathology and not including radiology and leveraging the infrastructure that you have already invested in, then I suggest that you may well be having the wrong conversations. I think it's very important to leverage that investment both in terms of economies of scale, but also in terms of patient care. Really, really important. And here are just a few sound bites. This is a comments that we've gleaned from talking to pathologists around the UK and indeed the world. And I don't think there's one of those comments that wouldn't have applied to a radiologist some 10, 15 years ago. So, if it's such a good idea, why hasn't it happened yet? Well, as always, there have been a number of barriers slowing progress. And I think we're just about at that tipping point now where digital pathology, or more importantly, integrated diagnostics, will really rapidly overcome these barriers and be rapidly adopted across the market. First and foremost is the regulatory piece. FDA in the US is critical. It's a slow process, but the clinical value is so huge that it will happen, and it will happen soon. There's been a lack of standardization. The DICOM standard has not really been implemented widely across digital pathology right now. Slide scanner vendors still produce image formats in proprietary formats. When looking and reviewing your solutions, make sure that you consider a vendor that is able to accommodate these proprietary formats until such time that the DICOM standard is widely adopted. From an organisation point of view, the pathology department has never really had the engagement of IT. Why would it? It's been a traditionally highly analogue workflow. And again, we saw in radiology solutions really came to the fore once IT got involved and brought their expertise. into what is otherwise a very clinical area. Culturally, pathologists feel very much wedded to their microscope. We did a pilot up at Salford not long ago, and the pathologist said, "I'm sorry, you are never going to take my microscope away from me." Within 3 days, he was reporting 100% of his slides using the digital platform. So yes, it's a problem, but we can overcome it. The business case, very, very important. We all know that the NHS were being forced to do far more with far less, and actually going to the people that provide the money, asking for more money is simply not an option. We need to prove as an industry that we can deliver these solutions out of existing revenue streams. And moving on to the next point, I think the technology has really evolved to such a point that in terms of price and efficiency that we can now do this. And the final barrier there is the lack of leadership. That's not to say that pathologists aren't interested in driving their profession forward. They absolutely are. However, it is an aging profession with fewer and fewer younger pathologists entering the profession. Therefore, the guys that are involved are pretty much maxed out, and there's a shortage of people to draw from. So, in a nutshell, that's, I think, why the technology hasn't been adopted quite so widespread just yet. But I think, as I say, we're right at that tipping point. So, are we doing the right thing by the pathologist? Pathology suffers from extraordinary long lead times for all the reasons that I've already discussed. Moving those glass slides from A to B, lost slides, repeated examinations, all produce lag in the system. As I've already mentioned, there's a huge amount of variation in diagnosis of pathology slides. There's a single analogue specimen, and the 2 lines that you can see are the opinions of 2 separate pathologists. Again, we believe the digital tools and the ease of access to subspecialists will reduce situations such as this. There's a huge amount of manual work involved, many hours spent bent over a microscope, actually counting mitosis, cells, things like that. We've got tools within our platforms that can automate much of this task. Now, we're not saying that you hand over responsibility to a machine, but we do believe that these digital applications can very much assist in this process. This is a typical representation of a pathologist's desk when he or she comes into work on a Monday morning. That is a pretty average caseload, and a pathologist will need to manually take out the slides from each of those packets, place them on the microscope, and report each and every one of them. You can imagine how inefficient and difficult that workflow can be to handle. And again, sorry to keep banging this drum, but inefficient MDT and access to radiology. I think sometimes today in MDT meetings, the pathologist, not the pathologist, but the pathology itself can be seen as perhaps a bit of a poor relation in terms of the technology. Radiologists are already very, very used to preparing cases, getting the slides ready for immediate discussion in the MDT meeting. The pathologist, on the other hand, typically has to take the slides out of the bag, put it onto the microscope, find the area in question, by which time the group may have already moved on to the next patient. The MDT meeting has absolutely revolutionised healthcare. However, it is an extraordinarily expensive meeting, one of the most expensive meetings in the hospital. If we can cut down time spent in that meeting and really speed up the discussions, then economically it works, but also it's a bonus for patient care as well. So you're really at a tipping point now, and I urge you all, if you are considering the purchase of integrated diagnostics or digital pathology, that you choose wisely. Select a vendor that has the heritage and is able to provide a completely integrated view of diagnostics across your healthcare space. So the title of my presentation was Everything You Need to Know, Digitisation of Pathology. So what I'm going to do is just spend a few minutes now trying to boil down some of the things that we've discussed into a few takeaway points. Data storage is big, okay? These slides are extremely high resolution. As I've said, half a gig to a gig per slide is very, very typical, and some cases may warrant at least 50 slides in size, so significant. However, what I would say is that radiology departments have been producing this level of data for some years now. We typically engage with trusts producing 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 radiology examinations per year. Conversely, the numbers in pathology are much, much smaller. So in terms of data quantities, we're probably we're quite used to handling this level of data. And again, I urge you all to consider what has been done in radiology and leverage that back-end infrastructure. Make the most of your investments. Not to mention, of course, that cloud is just around the corner, and the cost of storage within those cloud environments is bringing that level down and down and down. So I think data storage was once a big issue, becoming less so as every day goes by. Networks and fast viewing, I guess if the IT guys in the room will be extremely worried about the thought of 50 gigabyte files being passed around their networks on a day-to-day basis, from workstation to MDT meeting, etc. Again, this is where medical imaging heritage really comes into play. Today we're able to leverage modern streaming technologies such that the 50 gigabyte file will go from the scanner to the archive, but when viewing that slide, the pathologist only needs to look at about 1% of that slide in terms of the data footprint. Okay, you can't do that unless you're leveraging the streaming technologies. And of course, secondary to that is for the technology to be adopted by the health professionals, it needs to be quick. A pathologist does not experience any lag when looking down a microscope today, and would expect none when looking at a digital platform. So that data footprint in terms of what is passed over the network is extremely important. Again, integrated diagnostics. I think I've probably laboured this point enough. But choose a solution that allows you to leverage the back-end economies that you've already invested very heavily in. Learn from radiology. Pathology is fairly low on that maturity curve. IT in radiology has already answered all of the questions around performance, reliability, stability, and lower cost. I think if you engage with a vendor that has this experience, you can very, very quickly leapfrog that maturity curve from the bottom to the top. It certainly won't take the 15 years that it's taken the industry to finally get there in radiology. Avoid scanner lock-in. As I've already said, the scanner manufacturers have done a great job of bringing digital pathology to the masses. They've quite rightly produced their own viewers to accompany the scanners. Problem is, of course, that they all leverage their own proprietary formats. I would suggest that when looking at pathology solutions, that you consider a vendor that can accommodate these proprietary formats, but is already well equipped to handle a DICOM standard when it becomes widely adopted. There are vendors out there that can do both of these scenarios today. Of course, if you avoid scanner lock-in, that has the added benefit of improving competition within the industry, driving innovation and keeping costs down. Something again that we've seen in radiology. No longer do you see an entire radiology department that provides modalities from a single manufacturer. Not at all. The ecosystem is awash with all types of modalities, and long may that continue. I think we all agree that the necessity for digital pathology is absolutely there. I'm certainly convinced about it, and I hope you guys are. However, unless we can prove that the finances work out, this technology will not get off the ground. So if necessity is the mother of invention, then the business case is the father, and I'm afraid you can't have one without the other. Choose the right scanner. And choose your scanner not just for today, but for where you think your department might go in the future. Scanners are, you get what you pay for. There are entry-level scanners out there that will digitize a small amount of slides in a particular day, and there are enterprise scanners aimed at much higher throughputs. Really carefully consider what your workload is going to be, both now and in the future, and choose your scanners wisely. As I'm sure there have been a number of talks today, it's very, very important that any systems you put in place are able to integrate well with upstream and downstream systems. There is absolutely no point in creating more silos within your enterprise. So please, whichever solution you go for, make sure we've got the experience of linking in with those EPRs, LIMS systems, RIS systems, etc. Very important to make sure that the information gets to the right people at the right time. And of course, where we can integrate in using standards, then the cost of those integrations is driven right down. Efficiency is improved, and ultimately patient care is improved. And my final take home is the future is already here. I don't know if there are any Back to the Future geeks, but it certainly wasn't lost on me that just last month, the day that Emmett Brown visited in the future was just a few weeks ago. I think we're already at that point in terms of the technology, the finances, the business case, and the experience. So let's not wait. Let's get on and do this, I say. Thank you. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
I've been working in this field for quite a few years in digital pathology with Imperio and DACO and PathXL latterly as well, and digital pathology has been very, very successful in the research market. All the pharma companies have got multiple installations and they've spent millions and millions of dollars in this market, but I'm still a little bit skeptical about clinical uptake because there is some fundamental barriers to it. And for example, with large images you have to stitch them together, and even the best scanners, you get occasional stitching anomalies because of that. And you also generally lose the focal plane. And pathologists, when they use the microscope, if you sit and talk to pathologists, they're constantly, maying in the Z direction all the time, just focusing up and down. And you lose that on a two-dimensional image. And that's, an issue, I've had in different companies throughout the years, and getting over that objection is very hard. Pathologists, the review process is quicker. Of course, you have to scan the slide. It's 1 to 2 minutes in the first place. 100 slides takes an awful long time, takes 4 hours. So how is Sectra responding to those types of objections to adoption?
It's a good question. The answer really is that particular piece is down to the scanner manufacturers. And really making the efficiency of that scanning process far better. My understanding of working with a number of slide scanner manufacturers is that they are overcoming these issues. with multiple focal points, especially when you start looking at the cytology slides, which do have multiple levels. My understanding that vendors such as Hamamatsu and indeed others are capable of scanning at multiple depths within that particular slide. I think that maybe you might be better placed to explain that answer to me. But certainly from an IT and a platform perspective, we're able to accommodate the images that are given to us.
Hello, my name's Fred Mail from Musgrave Park Hospital in Taunton. One of the differences between radiology and pathology is that the size of the image files is very much greater in pathology, and consequently the storage costs start to become very significant. Have you any idea what the storage costs would be, given that you might be storing the entire workload of a department for several years? What sort of costs are you finding users are having to budget for in order to run a pathology laboratory?
It's really almost impossible to say, to actually put a pound-dollar figure on that. What I can say is that the workloads and the throughputs in pathology departments are approximately a tenth of that is put through the radiology department in terms of numbers of exams per year. What I can also tell you is that on average a pathology examination is approximately 10 times the size of your average radiology examination. So what that tells me is that radiology and pathology are actually, albeit dealing with very different numbers of examinations, the data volumes are roughly speaking the same. Sectra and other companies are very much investing in cloud technologies today, and the OpenStack type platforms that are available today are absolutely driving that price point of storage down and down and down. So I believe we've now crossed that threshold where the cost of storage is prohibitive, and it should no longer be a major barrier, especially when you consider the clinical benefits of moving to a digital system such as this.
Another major difference between pathology and radiology is that in radiology rather, digitisation has taken away quite a few process steps. So you no longer need to develop a film, you no longer need those toxic chemicals and all those ventilation apparatus that you used to have. You also speed up the process because you haven't got to wait for films to be processed and for them to dry. But in pathology, you still have to produce a slide just the way that you used to. It doesn't take away any process steps. You then have to scan it. Now, to scan about 300 slides, which is approximately the output of a medium-sized pathology laboratory a day, even with an enterprise-level system like the Omnic system from GE, would take approximately a day to do. So you're adding a day to the process sequence, whereas in radiology, you subtracted a whole load of time from the process. So the advantage in radiology is very much more obvious than it is in pathology.
I agree. This is, and that was the reason that I put the slide up early on in the presentation to actually point that fact out. Undoubtedly, this is a process that we simply cannot get rid of in pathology, and it's unfortunate, but I fundamentally believe, and indeed our pilot studies have shown, and I imagine the GE Omnics studies have shown, that the benefits both in terms of cost of transporting these slides around, the glass management piece, really outweigh the cost in terms of time spent with that extra step.
Thank you. I'm a clinician, I'm a GP, and I'm not an IT geek in the geek sense.
Me neither.
But there was something that you said that made me just remember something from the past. Presumably you're using compression algorithms to store the data?
As with any medical image, we always store our images in a lossless compression format, so there is no data loss whatsoever. When those images are presented to the end user, they are presented in all of their glory.
That was the question I was going to ask, because as far as I was aware, some of the compression algorithms did a sort of averaging technique, which said this is what we expect to see, so we'll put a blue pixel in here. So you're not using that at all?
There is no interpolation whatsoever, so there is no information added to nor taken away from the image that you as a clinician would see.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys.